week on mounting frustration in the WWE women's locker room, at least with some talents. Maybe not all of them, but certainly some of them. Speaking on Fightful's YouTube channel on Wednesday, Sean Ross Sapp stated that he has spoken with many women in WWE who were frustrated with how the women's division was being booked. He said, somebody asked me about women's booking, and I said, yes, I have spoken with plenty of women in WWE who were frustrated with how the women's division is booked. This isn't a new issue, but it's nowhere near the level of frustration seen around the Royal Rumble in 2022. Royal Rumble 2022 was so bad that I developed sources because of how bad it was booked. This is nowhere near that. Now, the 2022 Rumble, for those of you who may have forgotten, is the one where Sasha Banks came out at number 1, dressed as Sailor Moon. She had been gone for like a month. So this was like her return, and then she was eliminated 10 minutes into the match by Zelina Vega. Tamina lasted longer than Sasha Banks did. It was fucking ridiculous. So Sean said that one of the Vince McMahon pitches for that Royal Rumble was to have Ronda Rousey come back and eliminate the entire field all by herself. Thankfully, that did not happen. She did win the Rumble that year, but she entered at number 28. I don't need any convincing, but because some people do, it's nice to be reminded every now and then why that company is better off not having Vince McMahon running creative anymore when we hear about shit like this. Can you imagine Ronda Rousey coming back and eliminating 29 other women to win the Royal Rumble? As awful as that second run was when she came back, that's how it kicks off. The fact that it was even pitched in the first place should have gotten him barred from the building at Titan Tower. They should have revoked his keycard for that. Sapp continued, though. He said, there was a situation where one women's WWE performer reached out to me and said, dude, can you find out if I'm listed internally as a heel or a babyface? And I was like, damn, okay. That's what I was wondering on Monday when Roxanne wrestled Raquel. I wouldn't be surprised if it was her. I was like, wait a minute, Roxanne Perez is a heel in NXT, and yet in that match with Raquel, especially the way they were talking about her on commentary, you would think that she was a babyface. He says, I also know that there have been WrestleMania pitches that were rejected because some talents don't want to be just in a token tag match. They want things put on a more even plane in the women's division. Contracts are going up. Viewership is adjusted accordingly for when women are on screen. You're adding more titles, add more matches, all that stuff. There's not that element of where a lot of the men not only have one thing going on, they have a lot of different things going on. And that's just not the way it's been for the women. And I don't know if that's a Triple H thing or what. He says, there's a lot of people that have been parked. For example, I'm not going to say Natalya is frustrated, but they signed Natalya. They wanted to keep Natalya. They had creative plans for Natalya. What has Natalya done since? Hasn't been on NXT, hasn't been doing anything. Now, whether or not you're a Natalya fan, you can understand why she or anyone else would be frustrated, right? It's not hard to see why. If she is, he's not outing her as a source. He's just using her as an example here. They threw a lot of money at her to re-sign her. She obviously wants to keep wrestling. I can see her being a very important part of training future female stars, maybe ending up with a coaching role at the Performance Center or with NXT at some point, but she wants to wrestle. And so if they re-signed you with the understanding that you would still be wrestling and you're not wrestling, then yes, that would be pretty frustrating, as an example. And by the way, when Sean says, I don't know if that's a Triple H thing or what, I can't imagine that there was some edict from Ari Emanuel and the people above Triple H and Nick Khan that said, hey, we want less women's wrestling on the show, or you can feature it, but don't feature it as cohesively as you do the men. Like, no. When we're talking about creative issues like this, you can say it. It's okay to say it's a Triple H thing. Now, whether or not there's a method to the madness or not, I don't see what it is. But when you're the head of creative and you're the chief content officer, I'm sorry. For all the people, myself included, who would lay all the shit at Vince McMahon's feet when he was in charge of creative, right? He was in charge of everything, right? It was his company and he had his hands in everything.
That's kind of the
good, bad, or indifferent. It starts and stops with whoever is in charge of creative. In that case, for many, many, many years, it was Vince McMahon. There would be good stuff, and it's like, okay, even if he didn't come up with it himself, he greenlit it, he allowed it on TV, so you can give him credit for that. But for the bad shit that we saw, whether he came up with it himself or he okayed the idea from somebody who thought that he would like it, that's his responsibility. That's on him. You want to blame Vince? Go ahead. It's no different with Triple H. I don't know why some people, and I'm not saying Sean is doing this, but I definitely see people who will treat him with kid glove. People accuse me of doing that, and I just laugh. Like, I can't take you seriously if you say something like that, because numerous times I've called Triple H out for things I don't like or things that I do like. Right? There are things he does that I do like and I think are great. But there are people out there, and it goes back to the tribalism, where if you say anything bad or anything negative about the company, about Triple H, about Tony Khan, about AEW, they can't handle it. They can't. And they leap into defense mode. But it's okay to say that Triple H is not infallible. There are things he does that are not good. Or that the women's division or the tag division, there are certain aspects of the show and of the roster where improvements can absolutely be made. He is the head of creative. He is the chief content officer. If you have issues with that, then you lay it at his feet. So yes, it is his responsibility. Now, Fightful Select had additional details about this. Because Sean initially brought this up. It was during a show that he was doing. It might have been a super chat or something that came in. So now they had a formal report about this whole thing. And he said, we were asked to expand on some of the frustrations of the women's division. It's important to note that it does not reflect the entirety of the division, but was echoed by numerous talent. Several women on the WWE roster spoke with Fightful and noted the lack of focus on developing contenders, the tag team division, and screen time for women outside of the top of the division. This was said to be specifically in comparison to NXT, where main roster women's talent have noticed how much screen time and focus those talents get and how emotional investment then follows. There was also a point of redundant storylines with the same talent not only being featured at the top of the card, but even in the mid-card title scene. Those that we spoke to were happy for those who get that screen time and said that it shouldn't be a they're getting too much time conversation. It should be give other people more time in addition to them conversation. Those that Fightful spoke with pointed to Sonya Deville effectively being cut while negotiating a new deal as something that didn't instill confidence when they are not being used by the company. We're told that Deville had been told as recently as 4 days prior to her release that the company was looking to keep her. Several who inquired about their creative plans were told that their time would be coming, and they were asked to be patient. I understand not all of the women can be featured in prominent roles at the same time. Some of them are going to have to wait, and if they have ideas for them and they're just waiting for one story to end and then theirs begins, right? I totally understand that. So is it a case of Triple H or whoever, are they being honest when they say that, or are they just trying to get them off their backs? I don't know. There are only so many segments on one show, and you're sharing time with the men as well, and the men's roster on Raw, the men's roster on SmackDown, it's bigger than the women's. But this is not a new problem. This has been an ongoing problem now for a while. The lack of focus on the tag team division, since they insist on keeping those titles, the lack of attention to stories outside of the top handful of women in the division, Rhea Ripley, Liv Morgan, Nia Jax, Charlotte Flair, now that she's back, Tiffany Stratton, right? They get all the attention. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but, or at least in most cases, but they get all the attention. But now you have mid-card titles, 2 of them, that you just introduced, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. Triple H has done a terrible job of this. Look at fucking Ivy Nile. Ivy Nile has been talking about challenging Lyra Valkyria for the Intercontinental title. Then has a match on Monday with Dakota Kai to determine the #1 contender. You would think that Tommaso Ciampa snuck out there and asked for a moment of silence. It was so quiet in that building. Nobody cared. Why should they? It's a #1 contenders match for a title that nobody gives a shit about. Because they haven't been given a reason to care. And this is not a problem unique to the women, by the way. It's the same reason the men's IC and the men's US titles were in the doldrums for so long. Gunther's run and the way that they protected him, that really elevated that Intercontinental title to a place that it had not been in many years. I would argue it hadn't been there since Miz had that run back in 2017. And before that, I couldn't even fucking tell you the last time the Intercontinental Championship meant a damn thing. Shinsuke Nakamura, he won the U.S. title from LA Knight. He spends most of his time now stalking people backstage like Japanese Jason Voorhees. Right? I mean, Lyra beat Dakota to win the title on January 13th. It took them an entire month to get her a match. And when they did, what happened? She lost. Non-title, it was a qualifying match, but she lost. In the same week that their other champion, Chelsea Green, also lost. Yet Ivy Nile is talking about challenging Lyra for her title, and then she goes out there and loses to Dakota on Monday. So Dakota is challenging for the title tomorrow night. But forget that. What have they done with Ivy Nile on TV to warrant her getting a championship match or to get people to really invest in her? When Ivy is out there, people are silent because they haven't taken the time to let people know who she is or care about her. Interviews, backstage segment. I mean, the backstage segment that she's in, they're useless. Backstage segments, interviews, video packages, matches, whatever. You can't just give her a token segment here and there and expect people to care. So she's going to continue to wrestle to crickets, and then she'll be cast aside for the next challenger, and they won't do anything with her because, oh, she's not over. Gee, I wonder why that is. I understand the other talent, they have to get themselves over. Yes, that is true, but they need to be put in a position to succeed in order for that to happen. They need the support. And if they fall flat on their face, then they fall flat on their face and you move on to the next, but they're not being given anything in a lot of cases. Zelina Vega, she got a video package on Friday night on SmackDown. Good. That's a step in the right direction, but what else are they going to do to get people to care about her challenging Chelsea for the U.S. title when that day comes? They point to the ladies on NXT and how they're being used as a point of frustration. Why they're not doing something like that with them on the main roster. The NXT women's division right now is stacked with talent, right? You hear that word thrown around a lot. Man, look how stacked the division is, right? Guess what? So is the main roster. People don't talk about that so much. But look at the main roster. I know people love to rave about Julia and Stephanie Vaquer and Jordan Grace now is there. Oh my God, Sol Ruca, she's such an athlete. She's going to be such a big star. Zarya is great. Yes, so are Io Sky and Rhea Ripley and Tiffany Stratton and Bianca Belair and on and on and on. They've got plenty of great talent too. But look at what Shawn Michaels is doing with them on NXT and look at what Triple H is doing. I went because I watched the show this week and I went back and I counted it out. This week's episode of NXT featured 13 different women in matches on a 2-hour show. You're lucky to get half that on Raw or SmackDown any given week. NXT is the closest thing, honestly, to an all-women show that WWE has ever had. The first 2 matches this week were women's matches. And they shot an angle with Julia, Stephanie, and Jordan making the save for Carmen Petrovic and fighting off Fatal Influence. That set up the 6-woman tag that we had in the main event of the show. And evidently the ratings for the women's segments generally do well on Tuesdays. I'm not saying that it has to be even Steven. Do on the main roster exactly what they're doing in NXT. But they can learn from what NXT is doing right. They do a better job of fleshing out their characters. It's not always good. I'll tune in sometimes and I'll see these backstage segments that belong on fucking public access TV, not the CW network. But they take the time to develop their characters, not just at the top level, up and down the show. Some of the stories I just can't get into, but at least they're taking, that's what developmental should be for. They're taking the time to develop them. There are lessons to be learned from what Shawn Michaels is doing down there. But if these anonymous women are worried about a lack of equity when it comes to TV time, or if they're worried about the company focusing on the same ones over and over and over again, boy, it ain't going to get any better for them once Becky comes back and when Julia eventually gets called up and Stephanie gets called up and Jordan gets called up. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be great to see those women mixing it up with all the big names on Raw and SmackDown, but I don't see it getting any better for the women underneath.
Business taxes was always so all-consuming.